It's a once and then you're good for life.
Yeah, once you go, you're a qualified AIS instructor, and
For life.
that's it. Yeah.
That's it. Same the Air Force.
Which is, that makes it kind of weird because you can, like, it's definitely perishable, just like any knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm gonna ask all my insurance questions you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know.
And then I will publish on the AFSA website and ask the real experts, and then I'll get back to you.
That's a great question. Let me find out for you.
Yeah.
You made this PowerPoint?
No, of course.
Oh, I was like, fantastic,
Yeah.
fantastic.
What we learned about today.
Instrument departures.
What's up?
You have the Zoom all we're working. Kilos are just so great.
Well, we'll give
Wow.
Lily,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah, we
were
walked in here
supervisors, really.
and she was like, "Yeah, of course I got it."
Well, you should have rolled with it. It's like, oh yeah, no, we got it. Like we, you know,
We're honest little noodles.
Yeah.
I'm so honest little.
Yeah, we don't want participation trophies.
They're integrous.
Integrous.
Participation. We want to earn it in our lunch.
Yes. I feel like that's
When you
not
guys can just
hard
flip to the
spot,
slides as it goes.
though. Love one right there. Just break her down.
Mm.
Get her to give you a hug. You think it's gonna take a while.
And
She
you're
looked at
gonna
me.
do the slide guy.
Sure.
Do that on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
Ooh, that's a bullet. Slide down.
Boom.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Slide
course.
down.
He enabled academic excellence in the squadron.
Okay. I got burritos for my crew Monday. How was that a bullet?
Here we go.
Okay.
You provided sustenance for global airlift crew.
Mm.
Sustained combat readiness.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a good one.
Sustenance.
And what's the result? That's the impact. What's the result?
Sustained combat.
Happy pilots. Happy and full pilots.
No, the actions you supply crew, impact,
With essential
would
mission
impact
crew.
fed, I don't know, 15 aircrew members in the result.
Were you there that one day we were trying to explain to Brian like action, impact, result?
Yes, here's what
We were like action, eat Taco Bell, impact, upset stomach, result, Alex shits his pants. But he understood it. Brian was like, I get it, I get it.
Okay. I do that.
That's great. Action eats Taco Bell.
Impact.
I want you the hero in this scenario, you know?
Result.
Yeah.
So much action impact. Maybe a little more. But it's all like,
It's all up there. Just read the
It's
slide.
fine, it's in there, it's like slide.
Yeah.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah, next slide. I don't know which one. Next slide.
That's an ILS. Yep.
yeah, for a while.
Questions on this slide? Okay, me neither.
Yeah.
This is like a never ending.
Honestly, the people that just graduated, you can see
Twice
it from
now,
here, really
it's
smart.
like 2 p.m. First time was 9 a.m. Very roll call.
What'd you get in?
I was in at 8:20.
Oh my god.
It was my fault, Justin. I didn't know I was out there tonight. Are you happy now?
Justin.
Hey,
As long as you acknowledge, you just show up.
Hey, you know what I kind of miss? I kind of miss mandatory PT on
Really? Really, you missed that?
No. I miss being in transition play and being able to just be like, I'm gonna work out, and then just show up to work out.
Yeah, I'm doing.
Transition flight wasn't a thing.
I decided that was nice, sweet. No job. You got the best job.
Let's see, right? Yes.
Wait.
Hello.
Something
Oh,
else?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. Did you find a place for your deployment?
For my puppy?
Yeah.
There's other people still walking.
You know, boredom?
I don't know if everyone's planning on
So
that.
Ashley's just not gonna come with me all the time?
We can make an announcement.
Yeah, well, some of them like just did IRC, so.
Without,
Gotcha.
and then she'll come out.
That's not a reason not to come.
All these-
No, no, no.
Billy.
Hey.
Hey.
This is a little stuff. Special guy.
It's the Hot Topics.
If you do the CBT,
It's a brand, actually.
But you can
and
do it.
submit it, then you're good.
You can do it after the fact.
Within a week.
Well, it is. So
Within a week.
This is what the IRC is.
Kind of stuff you learn at AIS.
Then you have to go to the Hot Topics with an instructor.
I think it's technically a
Yes, it does. Right. I guess I'm
Slide
Slide guy.
That's CBT. Did you do the, is there a CBT?
Think it was a tip?
They got a
Your old part.
It is this guy. Yeah.
He's like,
They got a room sitting on.
Who got a leader?
Oh, no, don't worry.
You're still involved in the toilet.
Yeah.
Isn't that how most people do it?
Saying that's how the words of Americans are. I would assume it's like that, but at the same time, but at the same time, it's like, you got some options where it seems like this is like planning.
I
thought maybe
actually,
Australia
he
would
told us.
like.
So how often do you,
These are what Nick
do we do like
he comes up
the,
with problems. Three dudes in a line, all looking around.
Like you can tag it and call it.
No, like the toll takes it. So we would do them. But there's been issues right now with like COVID and Intel. Like,
Sweet. All right, so we're gonna talk about the hot topic for IRC, which hasn't changed since last May, so there'll be a new one next month. So the next time you do IRC, you'll get the new hot topic. But it is instrument departure procedures. So this is what we'll talk about. New 202 was published last year, right? So a lot of changes to it. Allows us to apply VFR instead of IFR for departures. We'll hit it here on the next slide. So yeah, the new 202 references a lot of civilian pubs now. So you'll see references to AIMS, to ICAO docs. So it kind of puts it on us to keep a little bit up to date. So if you're in a situation on the road and you're looking in the 202, that is our parent reg, right? So that's what governs us, but it's also a good idea to reference back to the source documents that the 202 is pulling from, so that AIM and ICAO docs. The important thing to note that 202 is it applies to both the state, so NAS and ICAO, unless specified otherwise. So unless it says NASA only or ICAO only, it applies to both. I'll let you read through some of these changes here. I'm not going to read all of them. But yeah, fifth bullet down there, IFR climb performance. It used to say one engine and operative. So now they put that into a separate section. So the climb performance, according to the 202, you just have to meet all engines operating. as a community and really as the Air Force in general, we still do one engine operative. And you'll see the last slide of the presentation will be the regulation or the guidance that says we need to plan one engine op. Yeah, and then diverse vector areas and omnidirectional departures. So they used to combine those into the same thing, and now they've split those up, right? Because omnidirectional is just ICAO. So start VFR departures. Yeah, there's no minimum climb gradient required for them. They now allow you to see and avoid obstacles in the new 202. So they publish here must have minimum VFR weather right at 1003. So that would be pretty sketchy if you're trying to depart, see and avoid obstacles with 1003 VFR, climbing straight up into the weather. I would advise, just because the new 202 allows a lot of stuff, we'll talk about some more in the future here. It's not necessarily a good idea to actually implement it. So, IFR departures. So with all engines operating to an entered structure or an altitude that will allow a diverse, so a random IFR flight. This is the standard stuff. None of this has changed. 400 feet, right? Before you can do any turns. It's not going to be a published procedure for a DVA, I guess. Or sorry, an omnidirectional. Yeah, and they do not account for locals and obstacles. So locals and obstacles, if you remember, those are what penetrate that, or will require a 200 foot per nautical mile for any obstacle less than 200 feet. So if it's an obstacle within that's being penetrated with lower than 200 feet, that does not drive the Terpsters to publish a departure procedure, so an ODP or a SID. So again, logos and obstacles is all stuff for you guys. That'll be in the trouble T section. So that's when we fill out our DPW, right? You add in that stuff in there. And it also publishes stuff outside of the ICA, the initial climb area. But you should also have an ODP or a SID to go along with that if it's outside of that 200 feet. Has anyone had any low flow sins that actually became like a factor recently? No.
There was actually one at Navy North that was published like prior to the end of the runway. I'd never seen that before, but they said 9 feet prior to the end of, I think it was runway 11 maybe down there. So you actually had to move the screen height distance back.
Nice.
Which was super weird.
Yeah. Yeah, first bullet there, low close and obstacle clearance is not assured. So even if there is an ODP published or a SID, that SID and ODP are not built to take into account the low close and obstacle. So that's why, even though we'll fill out the DPW with the min climb gradient if there's a SID or an ODP, you still put the information for the low close in. You have to vertically or laterally clear any obstacles. And remember how the old 202 used to say 500 feet, like within 500 feet of center line or something like that? So now they've just say, I think the verbiage is as applicable. So it's completely technique as to what you use. So we talked to the guys who had written the previous 202, and that 500 feet was purely just like a random example that then people kind of took as gospel. And it became a thing throughout the Air Force, like, hey, it's outside of 500 feet, we don't have to take it into account. I know some communities use 300 feet, but as the aircraft commander, it's kind of up to us what we actually want to use. You use 0 feet if you really want to. This slide's just trying to drive home the point that you need to make sure you're looking at the MSL altitudes and not the AGL. This is all UPT-based stuff here. Because, yeah, the AGL altitude published 74 feet, whereas if you subtract the MSLs, it's actually 172 feet above the departure under the runway. So it could be a significant change. now we've got screen height. They published for ICAO, so that's 16 feet. There's always kind of a question on where that reference came from. Now it's in the 202. And a lot of the new procedures that TERPS is TERPSing in the States, they're TERPSing for 0 feet, but we're still supposed to use 35 feet. If we need lower than 35 feet in order to get out of an airfield, you can call the MAGCOM TERPS office and their contacts in the FLIP GP to see if 0 feet is an option to depart. So I've done this once on the road. We actually ended up calling the USAFE TERPS office just because it was, I don't want to call the after hours number in the States, just because I didn't feel like it was worthy to wake them up over. They had no idea. So the default answer in that case is to go to the most conservative to hire. And I don't want to say, like, I think maybe if I had called the stateside TERPS guys, I was calling the USAFE ones, so they were looking at it's not airfields that they typically cover. So I just don't know if they maybe didn't have the node or whatever it was. So here's what the 202 now lists as our departure methods. It's kind of stupid, and Joel covered this in his STP brief, the video. It lists STP as an IFR departure method in the 202, so that's kind of incorrectly listed. Right, that's a contingency plan, so it's not a primary means of departing IFR. So the next 202 that'll get released, they're going to specify that out and clear it up. So diverse departures. These are what you're used to, right? So there's no obstacle penetrating the 40 to 1, so that's at 152 feet per nautical mile, besides the low close in. There's no ODPs published for it. So in other words, you can think of something like this would be in an area that, or an airfield where there's no terrain, no big obstacles. And this is where you have to play that turn until 400 feet. Diverse departures are something I think everyone's probably pretty used to. Yeah, you can't file one, and this is what you'll expect to hear if you're cleared a diverse departure. So just cleared as filed, cleared on course, cleared direct to, and the TERPS office is looking within 25 nautical miles, looking at obstacles in that area around the airfield to determine if the diverse departure is authorized. And again, they can do a sector as well, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So looking at an example here, if you look at the departure procedure section for Malone, New York, you'll see just things listed for runway 5, runway 14, runway 23. So because there's nothing listed for runway 32, you can fly diverse departure. But all the other runways in that case, you would not be able to. And in the takeoff obstacles down there, there still are low close ends that you'll have to account for. All right, so we got sector diverse departures. So same thing, except you're now only authorized to depart in a certain sector. So if you look there, the two examples they have, one of them says, like for runway 32 on that top one, diverse departures only between 351 through 141 counterclockwise. And then for the next one down for 15, climb on a heading between 100 to 325 clockwise to 325. So they'll go back and forth whether they use clockwise or counterclockwise, and it's not intuitive in a lot of cases. So you got to pay specific attention to the clock direction there to know what sector you're actually cleared to fly. Right, and the diverse departure is only going to be authorized when on course. So an on-course clearance falls within that published sector. So omnidirectional is just ICAO's term for it. Difference between the omnidirectional and the diverse is an omnidirectional is going to be published, whereas a diverse departure is not necessarily published unless it's a specific vector area or an area. So you can see the example there for Prestwick. Lists the omnidirectionals for three separate runways. Any questions on omnidirectional? All right, then there's ODP. So ODP can be a few different things, and we'll look at a couple of good examples here on the next slides. So it can be a specific routing, non-standard climb gradients, it can be non-standard weathermans in combination with a climb gradient, or reduced takeoff runway length, RTRL. So let's look at flippin' Arkansas. So I know I think Stu Gress covered some of these slides when he did a brief last year. You can see for runway 22, there's 3 ODPs that are published, right? So in red, you've got your non-standard takeoff weather minimum, so 300 and 1 1/4. You've got your non-standard climb gradient, which is in blue, so or standard being R as a C5 weather requirements for departure, right? So 1600 RVR. Or in green, RTRL. So, or alternatively, with standard takeoff mins and normal 200 feet per nautical mile gradient, takeoff must occur no later than 1600 feet prior to the departure. Then there's also the departure procedure that's published underneath that. So climb on a heading 231 to 1600 before turning right. The important thing to note is the purple always has to be complied with, right? So that's your departure procedure. Then you can use that purple in combination with one of those 3 up top with the red, blue, or green, and that constitutes a legal departure. That's what this slide says. So if you flew, like if you were to only fly that climb gradient that's published and not the departure procedure, that does not guarantee you obstacles. So it has to be in combination. Departure procedure always has to be compliant.
That was a super quick question.
Yeah.
So on the omnidirectional and the diverse, you said those are defined by not breaking the 40 to 1 barrier?
Correct.
Okay. Because on the omnidirectional, I had a climb rate that was greater than the 200 feet per nautical mile.
So you're saying in this example?
Nope, the one prior to this. Keep going. Right there. So min climb rate of 231 to 7.
Yeah. Let's see.
It may just be an ICAO thing, I'm assuming. Because like.
So it's I guess it's that last bullet there. An omnidirectional departure may be published as unrestricted like a diverse departure or have additional restrictions. So okay. I guess it's kind of, that's my best. Yeah, I guess they can publish time gradients with it.
Yeah.
To increase that restriction. So ODPs can also be in graphical form. And that's what this is showing. And you'll know it's an ODP versus a SID because it'll have in parentheses obstacle at the end of it. So the second note there says graphic ODP contains all the normal trouble T information, blah, blah, blah. This is not a SID and cannot be filed. So I need to get with the AFSA because I looked in the advisory circular that this originates from. and it shows that you can actually file a ODP, a graphical ODP, because it's published and it has the coding up top. You know how typical SID will have the code up there. Like in this case, it's LVK3. So I'll send out an email once I get an answer to that. But so we'll kind of go into depth into those three we just talked about. So first, hitting non-standard takeoff mins. Right, so these are going to be associated with an obstacle in the extended initial climb area. So for the example here, we've got right 301, and then in the bottom example 902.5, and they've also combined that with a climb gradient, so it can be combined. Again, still have to comply with that departure procedure in that second example. And a good kind of WAG, right, for non-standard takeoff mins, if you look and see 301 like that, you can guess that the obstacle that you're trying to see and avoid is probably about 300 feet and 1 mile away, because that's the weather you need to be able to see and avoid it. Yep, so you're now allowed to do this unrestricted. You can fly this if you really want to. You do see and avoid. Just know that those went, yeah, right here. So the visibility that's published is that you'll get on like AIS is prevailing visibility. That's not what you're actually getting like off the end of the runway. So if you're getting, they're calling 1 mile viz prevailing, just that doesn't mean that off the end of the runway that you're departing, you're going to have 1 mile viz. I would be very wary using this if you're right at the weather mins to try and see and avoid, right? Because then you're going to potentially climb up super early. Theoretically, you'll be above the obstacle, I guess, at that point. But I think it would be a very big cover factor to try to depart like this. Let you look through this one. I can read it all. Kind of what we talked about, just driving to the point again. Everyone good? So then we've got diverse vector areas. So these can be published, and they use the term now, DVA stands alone. So remember how SID stands alone? The DVA also stands alone. So the word that's going to key you in to whether you're doing a DVA is you'll hear like on departure, expect vectors. Just know that it's probably a good idea to have a backup plan if you're flying a DVA, right? Because that's obstacle clearance based on ATC having radar coverage and comm coverage of you. So if you lose either of those, now you're kind of in a no man's land because you're expecting them to vector you for obstacle clearance, but hey, you don't know what the vectors are because you can't hear them. So always a good idea to reference something else, maybe have a backup in case you do actually fly a DVA. So it can get kind of confusing between DVA and specific ATC instructions. Does anyone know what the difference might be? Kind of says it there, right? So they refer to a heading or a route and an altitude, but you're not going to get like expect vectors. So they'll give you a clearance on the ground to do something, and that's your specific ATC instructions, whereas the DVA is going to be, hey, maybe fly runway heading initially, expect vectors. And with the DVA, they should be giving you the minimum climb gradient that's required. And if they're not, please query them. So I think, was anybody on the crew in El Paso that had the issue with, there were ATC instructions that were given from Tower were different than what the ODP was published in the Treble T section? Somebody on that? You were on it? Yeah, so ATC shouldn't give you a clearance that's different than what's published in the departure procedure. And we'll look at it on the next slide. This shouldn't happen, where you can see that the first paragraph, climb radar director, then is filed, departure heading 280 to 6,000, expect flight level 240. But then if you look at the departure procedure, it's climbing right turn heading 260 to 1,300 before proceeding on course. Again, this shouldn't happen, but clearly it is. It sounds like Jeff was on that mission. So you are first obligated to fly the ODP, comply with the ODP prior to complying with ATC specific instructions. I would definitely call Tower, which I think is what you guys ended up doing, and tell them that's what you're going to do, so that you don't go off on some random heading that like, that's not what I told them. But it should be implied, and the documents in the AIM docs say that Tower controllers know that we should be complying with the ODP first, but I would definitely let them know or query them and confirm, like, hey, make sure that they didn't intend to give you that 260, not 280. But just know that you have to comply with the ODP first prior to complying with what ATC gives you. Everyone good with that? All right, going into SIDS. Like we talked about, SIDS standalone. You got 3 categories: military, your civil SIDS, and ICAO. So again, if there's a published climb gradient in an ODP, that does not apply to a SID. So you only have to apply to the climb gradient. And we'll look at the specifics, the differences between those 3, kind of a review of pilot training here in a second. All right, so military SID. Yep, you'll see the hash markings at the top and bottom. That's how you know it's military. It should say not for civil use on there, if it's specifically a military SID. And the climb gradients for military SIDs, that's when they'll specify out whether it's an ATC or an obstacle climb gradient, whereas a civil SID will not do that. Civil SIDs are only based on obstacle climb gradients. Yep, so only obstacle climb gradients published. So if there's a question on maybe, hey, it doesn't look like there's anything out there, and there's a crazy climb gradient, you can always ask ATC if that's an obstacle, or if that's just getting you over a city so you don't make much of noise. All right, then ICAO SIDs. So with ICAO, between a SID and an omnidirectional departure, a SID will have nav guidance. So if an omnidirectional, if they were to publish a departure that requires nav guidance, that'll be published as a SID, which is what this slide is saying. Otherwise, it's very similar to the states, but they do use them a lot for traffic flow. I know we probably see that quite a bit. Yeah, a lot of times it'll be just for convenience. So I know, like, for Zach and I, when we were flying over in Europe a lot, they'll literally have these things routing between cities and towns just to avoid noise. Because Europeans don't like it. All right, standard phraseology. I'll let you read through them. And then a review. So if you're clear to sit, you're departing on the sit, and you get a new climb to altitude, and you're in the States. Do you have to comply with level offs? Right, so say the top altitude was, say there was a level off at 5,000 feet for a certain distance, and they say, hey, cleared up to flight level 200. Do you have to comply with the
Level off to
level off requirement? No, you don't. How about ICAO?
Probably, because you're.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in ICAO, you still have to comply with level off. So getting a new top altitude does not cancel the step requirements on the suit. We've got MAGCOM certified procedures. Has anyone seen any specific MAGCOM stuff? I personally haven't. I think this would be maybe if we went into a field that was new, some austere place, probably some real contingency sort of ops. But it should be published, and I would definitely talk with TACC, make sure you're getting specific approval that this is a cleared procedure for you.
So we had to generate a departure procedure and a mission computer approach into a field that was in Iraq, and it was super sketchy. Because we were basically using Falcon View to TERPS our departure.
Yeah.
And this was me and a weapons officer doing this in the D. So it'll be weird if you had to do that in the C5.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. If you are going into a field that you need a new departure published for, you can contact the TERPS office. I think they like 48 hours in advance. Obviously, earlier than that, better. And they can try. They'll do a. They don't have to go out in person, but they can give you a rough TERPS procedure to fly. Zach and I, we had to do that quite a bit for places we would go. Yeah, I think they just use like Google Earth and whatever their fancy programs are. Sweet. So here's where, even though the 202 says that we have to meet all that stuff, all engines operating, it puts it on the PIC now. So PICs must have a one engine operative contingency plan. All right, simplest idea, just base all this off of one engine operative. And that's what we did. Again, just because the 202 gives you a lot of leniency now, doesn't mean you should take it. I would just definitely have a good powwow with the crew, see what's actually a good idea, weight, weather conditions, download cargo if it's climate gradient restrictions, rather than taking off in marginal weather to see and avoid an obstacle. STPs, right? So that's your contingency plan. If you lose an engine to depart, it's gonna have your escape routing. If you ever need a refresher, the video is on your iPad still that Joel made. It's great. So please watch that again. And the last bullet there, pilots may also use non-standard takeoff mins as a one engine in op contingency. So this is where I'm advising you to just use that with caution. You can use it to, hey, we lost an engine, now we're just gonna try to look at the ground and avoid obstacles. Probably not the best idea, but you can do it legally. And yeah, 48 feet subtraction is kind of our last option, whereas the old 202 said you could just, the PIC could just subtract it, and that's what we were doing in a lot of cases. Now it's, hey, you should try to download card, wait for weather conditions to improve. And then if all of that's not going to work, you can wait, you can subtract that 48 feet to reduce the climb gradient. If mission dictates, if mission justifies the increased risk. Questions on that? Yeah, so really, even though 202 has changed, it's still one engine op for us. So don't change anything you're doing. That's all I've got. So it can get really confusing, and it confuses me still. I confuse myself a few times. Go through the 202 again, read through it. I can send these slides out if you guys want them, and they have helpful notes, presenter notes, that are also a good reference just to read through. That's not actually in the presentation. Yeah. Anyone have anything for departures? Is that somewhat clear? That's all I've got.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you don't.